Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced by North Idaho College located on Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guests.
I am very pleased to welcome you to our sixth program in a rather long special series titled Americans' 225-Year Journey in Search of Personal Freedoms. We're just enjoying so much bringing you this series. It was actually a symposium at North Idaho College back in April, and we're airing it this summer. On our sixth program, we're so pleased to have such a distinguished guest. We welcome to the program Dr. Tonya Smith. She holds a PhD degree in Dramatic Arts from the Union Institute in Cincinnati. She also has a Bachelor's in Fine Arts from the Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. Not only is she highly qualified with her academic credentials, but she certainly has also performed in many different capacities. She is an author and creator of a play called Nappy Edges, which was chosen as the most outstanding original single performance piece. She also has been on Broadway in a theater production called For Colored Girls. She has her film credits in a number of films, including Sleepless in Seattle, Twin Peaks, Twice in a Lifetime, and Crazy in Love. She also has appeared on television programs such as The Fugitive. With those credentials, it is certainly clear that you are so qualified to discuss what we want to do. And we also want to tell our audience that you have been performing at North Idaho College in a play about the life of Sojourner Truth. And yes. With that, Dr. Smith, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Really nice to be here.
Thank you. And our regular panelist, Janelle Burke, we're so pleased to have with us, and she will start the questioning with our guest today.
Okay. Tonya, it's wonderful to have you here, but I want to give you an opportunity to tell our viewing audience about Sojourner Truth, because she really was a very special woman. When did she live, and what did she do?
Well, Sojourner doesn't know when she was born because, records of slaves were not kept well. But she lived in the early 1800s to the end of the century. She lived quite a long time. She talks about getting her freedom when New York actually outlawed, the state of New York actually outlawed slavery, which was before, it was 1817, I believe, before the Emancipation Proclamation. So they were leaders in the abolitionist movement, and a lot of northern states began to outlaw slavery outright as illegal, immoral, and so she talks about that's when she was born, although she was born many years before that. The second half of her life, probably after she was 40, she was converted to Christianity and became a fervent believer. She says faith is what got her through slavery. The horrors of slavery, being ripped from the arms of your mother and your father and sold time after time again to unscrupulous slaveholders, which she talks about. Can there be a scrupulous slaveholder? I mean, it's a paradox. How can you be a slaveholder and have scruples? But her life was about going around and preaching against slavery. She became an abolitionist, and she was sort of wooed into the camp of William Lloyd Garrison and Frederick Douglass, and together they almost had revival meetings to beat the drum against slavery. So I'd say that's her real legacy.
And she was a very effective speaker, wasn't she? She had some wonderful addresses.
And she was a wonderful singer. She was a wonderful dramatist. She really captured her audience, and she spoke out at a time when she spoke out for women's rights. At a time when Negroes did not have rights. She equated the two of them together. And many abolitionists, particularly white women, were very afraid to embrace the anti-slavery movement at the same time that the women's rights movement was going on, because they were afraid that it would deter people from getting involved in the women's movement, and that the two causes would be too mixed up. And Sojourner Truth saw them as one cause, actually, very much a human rights issue. She would say, she has a wonderful quote where she talks about, what is this about rights? If you've got a woman's rights, give them to her. If you've got a hold of her rights. And she would say, if a woman has a pint and a man has a quart, wouldn't you be mean not to let her have her pint full? What are you afraid of? She's only going to fill up a pint. You still have your quart, so I love that. I mean, it's very, very simplistic and very to the point. And when you think about it, what can you say? It's the truth, so.
I think you make a point that it's incredibly powerful, and as a person who teaches political science myself, and my great passion is the field of human rights and also civil liberties, the whole question of the 14th Amendment and the Bill of Rights. You've hit such an incredibly important point with her. We had on the program someone playing Thomas Paine, and Thomas Paine did the same thing. At the same time he was talking about freedoms based on race or color, he was talking about women's rights, and so was Sojourner Truth. And so I have a follow-up question to that whole process. Some individuals who have been pioneers, have contributed most, were impatient and said, we don't just take and give rights to one particular group of people or community, we must be inclusive of all, versus those who are gradualism and they look at one issue at a time and put the others off. I guess this question is for Dr. Pedford-Waits, and that is, what makes that difference? Some people are so much more committed to human rights and also much more visionary, while others use excuses saying we must be patient, we must wait.
Well, how long is what I say. This is how long must we wait? And I think that another favorite woman that I know of, not personally, but who I've done a show, I've portrayed her, is Lorraine Hansberry. And she says something very profound, which I think applies in this case. She says, from the specific, the universal is drawn. So I think some people get caught up in the kind of my issue orientation, and forget that yes, there are issues that have uniqueness in and of themselves, but each issue, particularly when you're talking about human beings, is connected to another issue. So I don't really object to the idea of building upon one issue, upon another issue, upon another issue, but I do object to just being kind of monofocal, where you can't see the forest for the trees, and I think that the most successful pioneers, at least in my opinion, are the ones who could be inclusive and embrace. I mean, the civil rights movement in this country would not have happened had all people not joined together to be involved in it. It wouldn't have been a movement. It would have been a moment.
Well, how eloquent words. One final question, I'll go back to Janelle, and it's about Sojourner Truth. She was not born as Sojourner Truth.
No, that's right.
And as my study of her, and it's so great for people like you to bring her back to be remembered in our time, and it's so dangerous to forget the contributions of people like her if you don't want to repeat history. But she changed her name, and she was so spiritual. And so would you address that she, so much of her great power that she had came from the spirituality and the understanding of what you're talking about, and also it even was reflected in her name, her change.
Yes, she was born Isabel Bumfrey, and she, when she had her religious conversion and she rededicated her life to the Lord, first of all, I have to say that had I been born in that time period, I don't know that I could have made it without faith in God either. That faith, you have to believe for something that you cannot see, and or else how can you go on? And that's what her life was about. But she, as oftentimes people have these great epiphanies or revelations in their life when something very tragic happens, and she lost her son. At that point, she became committed to life in a new way and to living her life for the cause. And she set out and believing in God that she would be taken care of. Now, this is an amazing thing to do in a time period that she lived in that was so violent, and the fact that she was a slave, and that there was still a movement about the North and the South and the Civil War and all of this period of history. She went about it as though she were invincible. She had an armor that she wore, and that armor was her faith, from head to toe. And she believed that could unite people, that belief in the ability for people to be free, for people to have dignity, for people to although you couldn't see it now, that it's something that one must have faith to believe will be if people keep walking on the road. Her name reflects a sojourner, a traveler. She would actually go from door to door, much like Jesus did, much like the life that Jesus led, where she believed that God would take care of her, and that she didn't have to have money or possessions, that it would be provided. She wasn't interested in wealth or material things. She was only interested in living her life. And so she would go from door to door and just ask for a meal, and she would preach and sing, and she would be invited to come up. And when she would begin to sing, actually they would want her to do more. So she sometimes entered into meetings where the atmosphere wasn't totally inviting, and where it was even hostile. And she was alone, a woman alone in that way, no protection. She didn't have a weapon. She didn't, and so truly I feel like she was a spiritual presence, a formidable presence, and she had this shield around her that protected her all her life. She died an old woman.
Internal strength was beyond.
Yes, she died an old woman. Yeah. Taking what she needed and no more. Yeah. And moving on from house to house.
Thank you for sharing her with us. That will be appreciated by our viewers. Janelle Burke.
While you're here at North Idaho College, you're going to be wearing some different hats. You're going to be talking about Sojourner Truth, which we've just been doing here, and then you're also going to be talking some about your own experiences in growing up and what life was like for you. Yes. Can you share some of that with our viewers?
Well, my one-woman show, Nappy Edges, was inspired by, I shouldn't say, it was inspired by my frustration. I'm living in Seattle. I don't ever say I'm from Seattle. I'm from the East Coast, actually. But I'm living in Seattle, been there 22 years. And I was frustrated by the lack of available venues for artists of color in the city of Seattle. And I actually had an incident where I was auditioning for a role, and it was between me and another woman. And the other woman got the role, which is not uncommon. That happens all the time. But what the director said to me sort of shocked me, and it was because I was black, they didn't want the audience to be confused. And so that's why I didn't get the role. Well, I hung up the phone, and and then I wanted to have more of a discussion about this. And so it's kind of like, we don't want them to be confused with this issue or this issue, kind of like the same conversation we were just having. And I couldn't get the person back, so I began to write, because I was just so frustrated about this issue. I wrote a poem, and I went down to the theater, a very well-known theater in Seattle, and I went to the administration offices, and I stood on the top of a desk, and I shouted this piece out at the top of my lungs, and it was about, I can't stand it. I can't stand this kind of thinking, black, white, all of that kind of thing. And a person said, you need to write a show about that. There's a contest coming up. And so one thing led to another. That's how it was inspired. I was frustrated by having doors closed not being able to gain access. And so I decided to create my own work and then, put it out there. And it did get picked up by one of the major theaters in Seattle and produced there and became very popular. It was very well received. But the work itself is a chronology kind of these, oftentimes adversity and oppression sort of, what do I want to say? They encourage the best in us, I think. I think oftentimes when you're pressing against something, you find strength that you didn't know you had. I'm sure that most people who are heroes like Sojourner Truth, like Frederick Douglass, like Martin Luther King, like Mother Teresa, didn't start out to be that. Yes. I'm going to be a hero. You don't start out that way. But because of the things you encounter and the blocks that you that confront you in your life, it causes you oftentimes to blossom in ways that you would never. And that's where this work came from. I started to examine my life growing up as an African American female in America, and what blocks and barriers I had encountered throughout my life, and as I was and what I did in order to move forward from them, or because of them, or in spite of them. And that's every piece in Nappy Edges. It's a series of pieces of stories of my life, and every piece reflects that. It reflects me not being able to fit into a ballet class because I had too many hips. But jazz was my thing. It's where I fit. It's where I found my dance niche, and it allowed me to use my physical voice in a way that I couldn't. So there was an obstacle, the teacher telling me I could never be a ballet dancer, but I could dance jazz, and jazz became the thing that I liked the best anyway. So that's what Nappy Edges is about. It's about adversity, and it's about trial, and it's about triumph, and it's about transformation.
Great.
So articulate. I could listen to you all day because you really do communicate so well. I want to follow up on that just a minute, because I'm always thinking of every program that we do of the viewers. Uh-huh. That's yes. My focus, and I never forget that. And I know we have people in our audience who have had great challenges and obstacles, and others that will. And if you just elaborate a little bit more on this whole idea of it, I've noticed in my lifetime in observing people and their challenges, and we have our own, that some people, when they have adversity, it really affects them in a very negative way. And I'm thinking of some people recently where their self-esteem was so lowered, and it was so sad. Whereas others have that reservoir, and they reach inside and have that strength and become even stronger and more determined. You're such a beautiful example where your play really came out of an adversity, whereas you could have just taken it from a defeated attitude and said, well, I'll try again later. So based on that, this is really, I don't know how much one can answer this from a philosophical point, but what causes people to respond so different to adversity, and what advice do you have to those people who are facing it to say, you could turn something negative into something positive for your life?
It's a very, very good question, and I probably could, be on Oprah, like be Dr. Tonya instead of Dr. Phil there, if I could really, I have this formula that people could. I think it's not just one thing, that causes people to respond differently. Like Sojourner Truth, I lost a son, and to crib death and SIDS, and it's something that you never think will happen to you. Right. And there's actually a piece in Nappy Edges that relives that whole event in my life. And that's where at that point, it's kind of like it's a crossroads, and you have choices. And I always tell my children, I tell my students, when they say, I didn't have a choice, I go, no, you always have a choice. Never let anyone tell you that you do not have a choice. There is always a choice. I think that's one thing that causes, for you to recognize, I could go this way and I could go that way. And I always also say to my students, hopefully as an inspiration to them, what good is your life if you don't use it? What good is your life if you don't? Every single event, we go, why did this happen to me? My question is, if it could happen to you, then why couldn't it happen to me? Not why me, why not me? I mean, when we look at the world, when we look at all of the things that have gone on and what people have navigated their way through, have triumphed, who have, it's amazing. And I look at people, at human beings, and the courage, these pioneers that we're talking about, Sojourner Truth, what she was able to do in her time. I owe her, is what I feel. You see, she's a hero to me, and what she suffered and what she gave, what she dedicated and what she poured herself out for is what I stand on. That's the legacy I stand on. And so if I were to give up, if I were to let an obstacle come in my way and just go, I just can't make it, I feel her behind me. I feel, Martin Luther King behind me. I feel Rosa Parks sitting in that seat rather than standing up. I feel all of the things that were done so that I could, and so I must. That's the bottom line. And I feel like people, that could be a key for people. My advice would be to look at what has already been in your behalf. And do you have a right? And look at who might be looking at you as their inspiration.
For the next period.
For the next, because we will go on, with or without you.
What you're saying that is so wonderful is that they're links.
Yes.
And those great pioneers of the past are helping you be who you are, although you certainly have your own great strength. But you are now blazing the trail for others who will come after you.
Yes.
Just one quick little footnote that I've not thought about in years, and I was thinking of a lady who lived to be 100 years old in the state I grew up, North Carolina, and a nice person. But I could, upon her death and the day of her funeral, I could not think of anything she had done for society. She was a good person, but she had not ever moved out to do something. And I thought it was a sad day that she'd been given a gift of 100 years, and maybe my judgment was wrong, but she had so many opportunities, whereas others have, in even a shorter life, have done so very, very much. So I think that is so inspirational, what you're saying. And I'm sure one other final point, and back to Janelle, we've been doing this for 7 years in the Chautauqua format. And the different people, both from other places in here who've played famous people, I've asked them this question, and maybe I'll let you address this. I said, after playing great people in history, such as Mary Wollstonecraft or Sojourner Truth and others that were such pioneers, how's it made you different? And they say to me, I have more strength. I have more courage. They went through more than I did, and therefore it's helped me with my life. You have that experience? That's
absolutely true. That is absolutely true with the resources that I have had in my life. And I think many of us in the time period that we're living in now, and all of us, yes, some of us have had more limited resources than others. Some of us have had more limited opportunities than others and so forth. But still, in the time period that we have lived in, as compared to, the Herculean efforts to just live your life back in the days of Sojourner Truth, of Frederick Douglass and those pioneers, I feel like I can't complain. I can't complain. And, one of my Jewish friends goes, I can't complain. Why should I? It doesn't do any good anyway. What does it do but make you too introspective? And I think we've got too much of that going on in our world anyway. We need to be more outerspective, and it would put everything into perspective for us.
Thank you so much. Janelle.
Well, we've talked about Sojourner Truth, and we've also talked about some of your accomplishments. But another thing that you did when you were younger was appear in a play for colored girls.
Right.
And can you explain to our viewing audience what it was, and then what kind of an impact it had upon you?
Tremendous impact on me. First of all, it was a play that it was called a choreo poem. And since then, we've evolved. That play was originally done on Broadway in 1976. and it won. They had to create a category for it because it wasn't quite a drama, a straight play, and it wasn't a musical, even though it had music and dancing in it. They didn't have a place to put it, so they created a category for it and won a Tony Award. And it was 7 African American women, which had not singing and dancing. I mean, it wasn't a musical. And on stage alone and telling a story from their own perspective in their own voice. So that was very historic and speaking about women's issues. Ntozake Shange, who was the playwright, opened up a door for a lot of female writers after that. They started just pouring out. Women had to begin to tell their own stories because our stories had been being told by men. And so the perspective of those stories was a little different. It's one of my problems with Tennessee Williams. When all the women in his plays are crazy, but for Tennessee Williams, all the women in his life were crazy. So that's what he wrote. For Colored Girls, took me, first of all, right from college. I graduated from Carnegie Mellon. I went to New York for a vacation after school before I started my job, and saw this play and was overwhelmed by it. A friend of mine said, "Why don't you call him up for an audition?" That's like calling the president. I was like, really? He said, "No, dude, what do you have to lose?" So I did, and they happened to be looking for someone to replace someone on Broadway right then. It was like timing. And I went down there, auditioned, and actually got into the play, did the Broadway run for about 3 months, and then they put together a national tour. So I went out on the first national tour all around the country. All of a sudden, here I am, a graduate from college and on Broadway, and then on a Broadway tour. So it absolutely changed my life.
I have to close. I'm so sorry. The clock always wins on this program. Dr. Tonya Petford-Waits, thank you for being here. It's one of the greater programs we've done. You're just so energizing to other people.
Thank you.
And a very powerful message. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you too, Janelle.
And Janelle, thank you for your questions. Ladies and gentlemen, we've so enjoyed bringing you today's program in our series called Americans, 225-Year Journey in Search of Personal Freedoms. As I indicated at the beginning of the program, this is the 6th of a rather significant long series. I hope you'll be with us again next week when we'll turn to yet another part of our history dealing with our struggle and our pursuit of personal freedoms in this country, which is so important, and we're taking you through some very important moments in our history. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running entirely college-produced program on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us again at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.